Captain Jackson Vire stared at the blinking red light like it owed him money, which, technically, it did. A distress signal meant another unpaid overtime shift. The fortress ship, ominously named Oblivion, floated through the dark matter-rich nebula like a drunk at a wedding, swaying and teetering, but somehow never quite crashing. The bridge smelled of burnt coffee and desperation, a perfect mix for your average Tuesday. "Captain, we're getting interference." Probably another hailing from Earth, Lieutenant Mira Calloway reported, her fingers flying over the console with the speed of someone who really needed to use the bathroom. Or maybe it's just Earth remembering we exist. Either way, it's annoying. Annoying. "That means it's definitely from Earth," Jackson replied, leaning back in his chair with the grace of a man who had long given up on lumbar support. "What do they want now? Another lecture on dark matter ethics? Or perhaps just a reminder we're expendable cogs in their cosmic machine?" Mira smirked, her eyes still glued to the console. "It's hard to say, sir. But if I had to guess, I'd say it has something to do with the Zelroth. Those bug-eyed bastards are always in the mood for some mischief." Jackson sighed. "God, I love Mondays. Wait, what day is it again? It's always Tuesday out here, sir." Chief Engineer Riggs grumbled from the shadows of the engine room over comms. "And that means the cough is always cold and the universe is always trying to kill us." Jackson nodded. "Thanks for the update, Riggs. I'd be lost without your eternal optimism." He turned his attention back to Mira. "So, what do we do about this interference? We could ignore it. Pretend we didn't hear it and go on with our lives," Mira suggested. "Too bad that's not an option. Orders from the top. Anything weird comes our way, we dig into it like a grave robber at a tomb sale." "Great. Just what I needed, more digging." "All right, patch it through. Let's see what kind of existential dread Earth wants to sell us today." Mira nodded, her fingers dancing over the controls. The static-filled screen sputtered to life, displaying a grainy image of a man in a suit that screamed government official louder than a megaphone at a metal concert. The man cleared his throat. "Attention, Captain Jackson Vire of the Oblivion. This is Undersecretary Harlan Fitch from the United Nations Exoplanetary Council." "Exoplanetary Council? Huh." Jackson snorted. "Bet they have a real nice office view back on Earth. Probably with a minibar. We've received reports that the Zelroth may have infiltrated our ranks. We need your crew to verify the integrity of our communications relay near your sector." "It's imperative for interstellar security." "Imperative," Jackson echoed. "That's a fancy way of saying you're screwed if you don't handle this." Fitch's face remained impassive, likely a skill honed through years of public service. "Your assistance is critical, Captain. The Zelroth are cunning, and their infiltration could spell disaster for the entire human race." "Well, that sounds like a good time." "Just the kind of thing I wanted on my bucket list," Jackson replied. "All right, I'll add it to our to-do list, right between survive another day and don't strangle the lieutenant." Fitch nodded, the kind of nod that suggested he'd heard worse. "Your cooperation is appreciated." Fitch out. The screen went dark, leaving Jackson staring at his own reflection in the black glass. He turned to Mira, his expression a mix of exasperation and amusement. "Well, looks like we're in for a fun little goose chase." Mira shrugged. "Could be worse. Could be paperwork, you've got a point. All right, get us ready to head out. Riggs, how's the engine holding up? Can it handle another jaunt without exploding?" Riggs' voice crackled over the comms, dripping with sarcasm. "Oh sure, Captain. The engines are just itching for another spin. They only cough up a lung every time we break atmo. Good to know they're still breathing. Strap in, people. We're off to chase shadows and other assorted idiocy." With the command given, the crew of the Oblivion began their preparations. Jackson watched them, a motley group of misfits held together by duct tape and mutual disdain for the universe. Mira with her quick fingers and quicker wit, Riggs with his patchwork engineering, and the rest of the crew who all had their own darkly humorous takes on this grim dance. As the ship powered up, Jackson allowed himself a moment of reflection. Sure, life on the Oblivion wasn't glamorous, but it beat being back on Earth, where the most excitement came from watching paint dry. At least here in the vast emptiness of space, he could pretend he had some semblance of control over his fate. "Think we'll make it back in one piece this time?" Mira asked, strapping herself into her seat. "Not a chance in hell," Jackson replied, grinning like a man with nothing left to lose. "But that's why we love it out here, right? One wrong move and we're cosmic dust." Beats dying of boredom. The Oblivion pushed forward into the void, engines rumbling like an angry beast disturbed from its slumber. As they sped toward the unknown, the crew fell into an uneasy silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the mission ahead and the misadventures that awaited them. Jackson leaned back in his chair, staring out at the swirling nebula, a chaotic mess of color and light that perfectly matched his mood. Whatever the Zelroth were up to, he knew they'd find a way to make it personal. And if there was one thing Jackson Vire was good at, it was taking things personally. "You ever wonder why we take these jobs?" Mira asked, breaking the silence. "All the time. But then I remember it's because nobody else is dumb enough to take them." Mira laughed, a sound that echoed through the bridge like a promise of chaos. "Well, here's to being dumb." "May we live long enough to regret it, to regret," Jackson echoed, raising an imaginary glass, "and to making it back in one piece, or at least in fewer pieces than last time." As the Oblivion hurtled through the nebula, the crew braced themselves for whatever came next. The universe, with all its dark matter and darker intentions, waited patiently to test their resolve. Somewhere out there, the Zelroth were scheming, and Jackson Vire was ready to meet them head-on, sarcasm sharpened and blaster ready. And in the great void of space, where the only certainty was uncertainty, the crew of the Oblivion continued their reckless race against alien intrigue, not because it was easy or safe or even remotely sane, but because it was theirs. And in a universe hell-bent on wiping them out, that was the one truth they could cling to. The Oblivion sliced through the dark matter nebula like a knife through a particularly stubborn stake. Captain Jackson Vire sat in his chair, doing his best impersonation of someone who gave a damn. His mind, however, was 1,000 light-years away, possibly contemplating the philosophical implications of unpaid overtime or just wondering if the stale donut in the mess could pass as breakfast. Lieutenant Mira Calloway was at her console, fingers flying with the desperation of someone who had once been told that typing faster actually made the ship go faster. Lyra Calum, the ship's strategic officer, stood beside her, staring at the data on the screen with the intensity of a cat watching a laser dot. "Jackson, we're picking up some weird chatter on the encrypted channels," Lyra announced, her voice a smooth blend of curiosity and skepticism. "It's like a bad radio drama but with more ominous implications." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Ominous. That's my second favorite kind of implication. What's your first?" Mira asked, not looking up from her console. "Irony," Lyra snorted. "These messages, they're talking about the dark matter resource race. The Zelroth seem to have their slime-covered fingers in it. They're planning to manipulate the entire thing to their advantage." "Of course they are," Jackson muttered. "Why do something straightforward when you can complicate the hell out of everything for everyone else?" Mira leaned back in her seat. "So, what's the plan, Captain? Besides the usual try not to die," Jackson scratched his chin. "Riggs, can you get us any closer to pinpointing where these messages are originating from? Or is that too much to ask from our beloved Rust Bucket?" Riggs' voice crackled over the comms, as optimistic as a rain cloud at a parade. "Sure thing, Captain. I'll just ask the engines nicely and maybe offer them a cup of oil. That'll do the trick, so that's a maybe?" Jackson asked. "That's a hold on to your ass, Captain." Jackson nodded. "Right. Let's get a move on then. Lyra, keep digging into those messages. See if you can find out exactly what they are planning. And Mira, keep an eye on any incoming interference. I'd rather not have another chat with Earth unless it's absolutely necessary." "Absolutely necessary," Mira echoed, like another hole in the head. "Exactly. Let's make sure we're the ones doing the infiltrating this time." The crew moved with the kind of practiced chaos that comes from years of barely controlled disasters. Lyra was glued to her console, eyes darting across the screen as she sifted through the encrypted messages, trying to make sense of the Zelroth's machinations. Jackson watched her work, his thoughts a jumble of half-formed plans and grim jokes. If the Zelroth were messing with the dark matter race, it meant trouble. Big trouble. The kind of trouble that usually ended with someone, or everyone, dead. Got something, Lyra said, breaking Jackson from his reverie. Looks like they're planning to use the dark matter to destabilize the entire sector. They have a base somewhere in the nebula, of course they do, Jackson sighed. I bet they even have a nice little welcome mat. Probably says wipe your boots before entering, Mira added with a smirk. Or no humans allowed, Lyra chimed in. Real classy, Jackson chuckled. All right, let's see if we can crash their little party. Riggs, how are we on fuel? Can we make it to this base without a refill? Riggs' voice came through the comms, thick with sarcasm. We're as good as a mule in a horse race, Captain. But sure, let's push our luck. What's the worst that could happen? I don't know, Riggs. What's worse than dying in the cold void of space? Jackson asked with mock cheer. Living long enough to lose my bet on whether or not we make it back in one piece, Riggs replied. Well, let's hope you lose then. With the course set, the Oblivion powered through the nebula, each beat of the engines echoing like an uneasy heartbeat. Jackson remained in his chair, his mind racing through contingency plans and worst-case scenarios as the stars blurred by outside the viewscreen. Captain, Lyra said, pulling him from his thoughts once more. If the Zelroth are using the dark matter as a weapon, they could destabilize entire planets, maybe even wipe out colonies. Great. Just what this sector needed, more mass destruction, Jackson replied dryly. Guess we know why they're so interested in the resource race. Mira shook her head. Is there any alien race that doesn't want to blow us up or take over our stuff? Not that I've met, Jackson said. But who can blame them? We do have some fun stuff, like unpaid overtime and stale coffee. Mira asked. Exactly, Jackson replied. Let's see if we can ruin their day before they ruin ours. Lyra, any luck on finding their base? Still searching, Lyra said, her eyes glued to the console. Give me a little more time. Time we might not have much of, Jackson muttered under his breath. As the minutes ticked by, the crew stayed on edge, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. Even Riggs' usual grumbling over the comms had fallen silent, a sure sign that things were more serious than usual. Got it, Lyra finally announced, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. I've pinpointed their base. Sending coordinates now. Nice work, Lyra, Jackson said. All right, everyone, let's get ready to pay our friends a visit. Riggs, how's our ship holding up? Like a toothpick in a flood, Captain, but she'll hold good. Let's go give the Zelroth a surprise they won't forget. With the coordinates locked in, the Oblivion changed course, heading for the heart of the nebula where the Zelroth base lay hidden. As the ship drew closer, the tension on the bridge ratcheted up another notch, each crew member acutely aware of the danger they were flying into. Captain, I have a visual on the base, Mira reported, bringing up the image on the main screen. The structure floated amidst the swirling clouds of dark matter, its design as alien as the creatures who inhabited it. Looks cozy, Jackson commented. Let's see if we can't make ourselves at home. They've got defense systems, Lyra warned. We'll have to be careful. Careful's my middle name, Jackson replied with a grin. Or was it reckless? I always forget. Whatever it is, let's make sure we don't end up as space debris, Mira said, preparing the ship systems for engagement. As the Oblivion approached the base, the first signs of trouble appeared. A cluster of Zelroth ships breaking from the shadow of the structure, their intent as clear as the blasters they were charging. Hostiles incoming, Mira announced. Looks like they're not in the mood for guests. Neither am I, but here we are, Jackson retorted. Let's give them a warm welcome. With the first shots fired, the bridge erupted into controlled chaos, the crew moving with a practiced rhythm as they engaged the enemy ships. The Oblivion shuddered with each impact, its shield straining under the assault but holding for now. "Riggs, we could use a little more power on the shields," Jackson said, his voice steady despite the barrage. "I'm giving her all she's got, Captain," Riggs replied, the strain evident even through the comms. "Thought you'd say that." Jackson turned his attention back to the view screen. "Mira, Lyra, let's see if we can't even the odds a bit." The Oblivion danced through the nebula, evading incoming fire and returning it in kind. Each maneuver was a gamble, each shot a desperate bid to gain the upper hand. The Zelroth pilots were skilled, their ships nimble, but the crew of the Oblivion had the advantage of desperation and a potentially suicidal disregard for odds. Jackson grinned as another enemy ship exploded into a shower of debris. "That's how you do it, folks. Keep it up." In the midst of the battle, Lyra worked feverishly at her console, her focus unwavering. "I'm attempting to access their systems. If I can disrupt their communications, it might give us a better chance." "Do it," Jackson said. "Anything to tip the scales." Amidst the chaos, a sudden calm descended as the Zelroth ships fell back, regrouping for another attack. Jackson's eyes narrowed as he considered their options. "Why'd they pull back?" Mira asked, suspicion in her voice. "Probably trying to lure us into a trap," Jackson replied. "Or regrouping for a bigger assault. Either way, it's not good news," Lyra added, her fingers flying over the console. "Never is," Jackson said, his tone grim. "Let's not give them the chance." "Riggs, how are we on firepower?" "Running low, Captain. We've got maybe one good punch left, and I'd rather not use it on an empty target." "Noted." Jackson turned his attention back to the view screen, watching the enemy movements closely. "All right, folks, let's make this count. We take out their base, we cripple their operation. We leave, they'll be back with twice the numbers." The crew acknowledged the plan, their determination a palpable force. Jackson knew the risks, knew that one wrong move could spell their end, but retreat wasn't an option. Not with so much at stake. As the Zelroth ships resumed their attack, the Oblivion surged forward, its crew ready to risk everything to turn the tide. Weapons fired, shields flared, and the grim dance of battle played out against the backdrop of the nebula, a chaotic symphony of destruction and resolve. "That's it, keep up the pressure," Jackson shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. Lyra's hands flew over her console. "I'm in, disrupting their communications now." With a triumphant cry, Lyra hit the final command and the Zelroth ships faltered, their coordination shattered. It was the opening the crew needed. "Now's our chance," Jackson called. "Take out that base." With everything on the line, the Oblivion unleashed its final salvo, a concentrated assault that found its mark. The Zelroth base erupted in a cascade of light and debris, the explosion a testament to the crew's determination and their refusal to go quietly into the void. As the dust settled, Jackson allowed himself a moment of relief, the tension easing ever so slightly. They'd survived for now and dealt a blow to the Zelroth's plans, but the fight was far from over. The dark matter resource race remained a volatile powder keg, and the crew of the Oblivion knew they'd have to keep running, keep fighting, to keep the universe from tearing itself apart. "Nice work, everyone," Jackson said, leaning back in his chair with a weary grin. "Let's head home. I think we've earned ourselves some cold coffee and a biscuit, and maybe a little less imminent death," Mira added, a rare smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe," Jackson agreed. "Just maybe." The bridge of the Oblivion was a mess of organized chaos. Cables snaked across the floor, consoles beeped incessantly, and the faint smell of burnt circuitry hung in the air. All the hallmarks of a ship running on borrowed time and borrowed luck. Captain Jackson Vire sat in his chair, a crooked grin plastered on his face, the kind that said he was about to do something either brilliant or incredibly stupid, or maybe both. "Lyra, you got anything on those sneaky Zelroth transmissions?" he asked, kicking his feet up on the console with the nonchalance of a man who'd made peace with the universe's indifference to his survival. Lyra Calum didn't even look up from her station, her fingers dancing over the buttons like a virtuoso playing a symphony of stress. "Still working on it." They're using some kind of encryption that makes our tech look like it was put together by toddlers with glue sticks. Ah, the classic alien superiority complex. They really know how to rub it in. Any chance we can crash their comms party? Working on it, Lyra repeated, her tone just shy of snapping. Give me a minute before you start planning the after-party. Jackson raised an eyebrow. An optimist, are we? I like it. Riggs' voice crackled through the comms, sounding like he'd just found a new level of suffering in the engine room. Captain, I hate to interrupt your banter, but the engines are running hotter than a summer day on Mercury. If you've got a plan, now's the time to make sure it doesn't involve blowing up. Well, that's always plan B. But thanks for the reminder, Riggs, Jackson replied. We're going to need to intercept one of those Zelroth communication relays. I'm betting they're hiding more than just their recipes for disaster. Mira Calloway finally looked up from her console. And by intercept, you mean what? Politely ask them to hand over their data, or the usual, shoot first, regret later, depends on how friendly their drones are feeling, Jackson said, leaning forward, his grin widening. Lyra, can you get us a lock on one of those relays? A few more tense seconds passed before Lyra's console emitted a soft beep of triumph. Got one. It's not far, but it's smack in the middle of a drone-infested zone. They're not exactly the welcoming committee type. Drones, huh? They probably think they are intimidating, Jackson said, cracking his knuckles. Let's see if we can't introduce them to the concept of human assertiveness. Is that what we're calling it now? Mira asked, eyebrow arched. Let's just say it's our special brand of diplomacy, Jackson answered, pushing off from his chair. Ready the ship, folks. We've got a relay to crash. The plan was straightforward, in the way that most things that could get you killed were. Slip past the drone patrols, hijack the relay, and extract whatever delicious secrets the Zelroth were hiding. Simple, really. As the Oblivion sliced through the dark matter nebula like a knife cutting through gloom, Jackson couldn't help but notice the irony of humanity's place in the universe. Always poking the cosmic hornet's nest, hoping it wouldn't sting back too hard. So far, it was a strategy that had a success rate somewhere between slim and none. The relay appeared on the edge of the view screen, an ominous structure that seemed to hum with malevolent purpose. It loomed in the darkness, surrounded by a swarm of drones that moved with the kind of precision only machines could muster. Looks like someone invited all their friends, Mira observed, pulling up the tactical overlay. Good, Jackson said, cracking his neck. Wouldn't want them to think we weren't worth the effort. Captain, those drones are armed to the teeth, Lyra warned, her gaze fixed on the shifting patterns of enemy patrols. Then we'll just have to be sharper, Jackson replied, his voice carrying that reckless edge he had come to rely on. Mira, plot us a course through their blind spot. Let's see if we can't sneak in and give them a surprise. The kind of surprise that ends with explosions. Mira asked. Is there any other kind? With the course set, the Oblivion glided forward, the engines humming a low, anxious tune. The tension on the bridge was palpable, a shared understanding that they were walking a tightrope over a pit of fire. Captain, if we get spotted, those drones will be on us faster than a tax collector in a rich neighborhood. Riggs' voice crackled through, his usual pessimism pounding like a drumbeat. Relax, Riggs. If things go south, just remember the plan, Jackson replied. Try not to die exactly. Simple yet effective. As the Oblivion closed in on the relay, the drones continued their patrols, oblivious, or uncaring, of the human ship sneaking into their midst. It was almost as if the universe had decided to give them a break, a rare flash of luck in an otherwise relentless shower of misfortune. Jackson almost believed they might just pull it off without a hitch. Almost. Captain, we're in position, Mira reported. Ready to initiate hack on your command. Do it. Lyra's fingers moved like lightning over her controls, sending streams of code into the ether, a digital assault on their alien adversaries. The seconds ticked by, each one heavier than the last, until finally, got it, Lyra said, her voice triumphant yet edged with disbelief. We're in. Now, Let's see what the Zelroth have been hiding, Jackson said, leaning forward with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for lottery winners and condemned men. The data poured in, a flood of information that was overwhelming in its complexity. Lyra's eyes widened as she processed the streams of alien code. Looks like they've been monitoring every ship passing through the nebula. They're mapping out vectors, calculating warp routes, everything. So they're not just interested in dark matter for the fireworks show. They're planning something bigger, Jackson mused, his mind racing. Bigger, and if their notes are anything to go by, nastier, Lyra confirmed. We need to get this information back to command. If the Zelroth are planning an invasion. Before Jackson could finish the sentence, the ship rocked violently as alarms blared throughout the bridge. Drones spotted us. Mira shouted, her hands flying over the console. They're converging. Looks like we're back to Plan B, Jackson said, gripping the armrests of his chair. Riggs, I hope you're ready for some fancy flying. Not like I have a choice, do I? Riggs retorted, his voice tinged with resignation. The Oblivion swung into action, engines roaring as it twisted and turned through the swarm of drones. Lasers lanced out from the alien machines, narrowly missing the ship as the crew fought to keep one step ahead of their pursuers. Keep those shields up, Jackson ordered as another volley of fire nearly clipped their starboard side. Trying, Captain, but they're not going to hold forever. Riggs shot back, the strain clear in his voice. The drones pressed their attack, relentless in their pursuit. The Oblivion's hull groaned under the strain, each hit bringing them closer to the breaking point. Lyra, any chance you can shut those things down? Jackson asked, dodging another burst of enemy fire. Not without sacrificing what we've got from the relay, Lyra replied, her voice taut with frustration. Then we'll have to outrun them, Jackson decided. Mira, plot us a course for the nearest jump point. On it, Mira said, her fingers a blur as she set coordinates. Course laid in. We've got one shot at this. Then let's not miss it, Jackson said, determination setting his jaw like steel. With a final burst of speed, the Oblivion shot through the mass of drones, narrowly avoiding destruction with every twist and turn. The ship's engines screamed in protest but held firm, pushing them ever closer to the jump point that promised escape, or oblivion. Jump in 3, 2, 1, Mira counted, her voice calm amidst the chaos. In an instant the nebula vanished, replaced by the familiar starfield of open space. The drones, unable to follow, disappeared from sensors as the Oblivion made its escape. The bridge fell silent as the crew took a collective breath, the reality of their survival sinking in. Well, that was fun, Jackson said, his voice carrying a weariness that belied his bravado. Fun, yeah, Lyra muttered, shaking her head. If you're into near-death experiences, who isn't? Jackson shot back with a grin. Good work, team. We've got the data and we've got a ship still in one piece, more or less. Let's get this information back to HQ and see if it's enough to spoil the Zelroth's plans. With that, the crew set course for home, the specter of the Zelroth looming large in their minds. The fight was far from over, but for now, they clung to the hope that their actions might just make a difference. And if not, well, there was always Plan B. The Oblivion cruised through space with all the grace of a drunk navigating a minefield. Inside, the crew basked in the fleeting satisfaction of having escaped certain doom, again. The data they had pulled from the Zelroth relay had the potential to change the tide of the dark matter conflict, provided they didn't get blown to bits before handing it over. Jackson leaned back in his chair, the crooked grin still playing on his lips. Not dead yet. That's a plus, right? Technically, yes. But let's not get cocky. The universe has a way of correcting optimism, Mira said, eyeing her console like it might sprout fangs. Or maybe it's just you who's allergic to good news, Jackson shot back, never missing a beat. Could be. But the universe and we share a similar sense of humor, bleak and unforgiving, exactly. Before Jackson could relish the banter, Lyra's voice cut through the bridge's low hum like a cold knife. Captain, we might have a problem. A big one, bigger than being chased by a hive of homicidal drones. Jackson asked, eyebrows creeping upwards. Oh, just a tad, Lyra replied, her fingers dancing across her tablet like a pianist in a nightmare concerto. I was reviewing the data, and there's something else. Something that shouldn't be there. Someone's been downloading cat videos again. Riggs asked over the comms, his voice dripping with the usual brand of pessimism. Worse, Lyra said, ignoring Riggs. There's evidence of tampering. Onboard tampering. A collective silence fell over the crew, the unspoken accusation heavy in the recycled air. Paranoia was an old friend aboard the Oblivion, lurking just beneath the surface, always ready to rear its ugly head. Jackson's gaze scanned the bridge, his voice measured. Let me guess. We've got a traitor in our midst. Looks that way, Lyra confirmed, her tone grim. Great. Because what we needed was a little more drama, Jackson sighed. Who's the lucky winner? That's the problem, Captain. Whoever did this is good. Real good. They've covered their tracks, but there are traces of incoming transmissions from an unidentified source. Recently, too. Lovely. So not only do we have a mole, but they're also in touch with the Zelroth. Makes you wonder what they're getting out of it, Jackson said, scratching his chin in thought. Maybe they just really hate working overtime, Mira suggested darkly, still tapping away at her console. Whatever the reason, it's a problem we can't ignore, Jackson said, standing up. We need to figure out who's playing for the other team and fast. Why? What do you plan to do when you find them? Riggs asked, his voice an echo of doubt through the comms. Invite them to a very intense team-building exercise, Jackson replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. Sounds motivational, Riggs. You might want to start prepping the escape pods just in case, Mira added, her sarcasm a thin veneer over genuine concern. Already on it. You know how much I love being right about impending doom, Riggs replied. Jackson turned his attention back to Lyra. Any bright ideas on how to flush out our little turncoat? We could try an old-school approach, Lyra suggested, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Go on, send out a false signal. Something only the mole would know is fake. If they bite, we trace it. You sure you're not the traitor, Lyra? That's almost too clever, Jackson teased. Careful, Captain. I might take that as a compliment, Lyra shot back, her smile sharp as a blade. All right, let's do it. We'll feed them some bogus intel and see who comes sniffing around. As the crew set about their tasks, the quiet hum of the bridge was replaced by the tense clicking of keys and the low murmur of whispered suspicions. Trust, always a fragile commodity aboard the Oblivion, felt as thin as starlight. The false transmission was crafted with surgical precision, a tantalizing morsel of bait designed to lure in the rat. With everything in place, all they could do was wait and hope their quarry was as desperate or as foolish as they seemed. The minutes stretched into an eternity, the suspense wrapping tight around the crew like a noose. Every beep from their consoles felt like a gunshot, every flicker of lights, a warning of impending betrayal. Then finally, Lyra's console chirped with the sound of a fish on the line. Got something. Incoming signal from the starboard maintenance bay. Jackson sprang into action, a predator scenting blood. Let's go have a chat, shall we? Mira, you're with me. Lyra, keep monitoring for any other surprises, like a second mole. Lyra asked, her tone half joking, half serious. God forbid, Jackson replied, heading towards the door with Mira in tow. As they moved through the dimly lit corridors of the Oblivion, Jackson's mind raced. Betrayal was an occupational hazard in their line of work, but this felt personal. Someone had sold them out, and for what? A pat on the back from the Zelroth. The maintenance bay loomed ahead, a shadow-filled space filled with the hum of machinery and the scent of lubricants. Jackson motioned for Mira to flank him as they entered, weapons at the ready. The figure standing at the console didn't even try to hide, their back turned as they continued typing with calm precision. Jackson felt a pang of irritation. Either they were incredibly confident or incredibly stupid. Step away from the console, Jackson ordered, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. The figure turned slowly, revealing familiar features twisted with an expression of resigned regret. Captain Riggs. Jackson's surprise was genuine, his guard lowering for a split second. Of all people, you were the last I expected. I know. That's why it worked so well, didn't it? Riggs replied, his hands raised in mock surrender. You're the Zelroth's little informant. Mira asked, disbelief coloring her words. Informant, double agent, traitor, take your pick, Riggs said, shrugging nonchalantly. I prefer pragmatist myself. Pragmatism doesn't usually involve stabbing your crew in the back, Jackson growled, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. You know how it is, Captain. This job doesn't come with a pension plan or health benefits. The Zelroth made an offer and I made a choice that put us all at risk, Mira snapped, her weapon trained on Riggs with unwavering focus. Risk is relative. The Zelroth have resources, protection. They're going to win this war and I'd rather be on the winning side, Riggs explained, his voice steady despite the tension. And here I thought you just had a death wish, Jackson said, shaking his head. Not today, at least. Well, the bad news is you're under arrest. The good news is you'll have plenty of time to think about your career choices in the brig, Jackson said, gesturing for Mira to cuff him. Riggs didn't resist as Mira secured his wrists, his expression one of resigned acceptance. I suppose there's no point in asking for a last meal, trust me. The ship's rations are punishment enough, Jackson replied, his frustration tempered with a dash of humor. With their traitor in custody, Jackson and Mira returned to the bridge, the weight of Riggs' betrayal hanging heavy in the air. The crew's mood was a complicated mix of relief and disillusionment, the cracks in their trust wider than ever. Riggs is secured, Mira announced as they stepped onto the bridge. He won't be causing any more problems, good. But this isn't over, Jackson said, his gaze sweeping over his crew. We've still got a job to do and the Zelroth aren't going to wait while we lick our wounds. Lyra nodded, the determination in her eyes mirrored by the others. We still have the data. We can make this count. Damn right we can, Jackson said, his voice filled with the resolve of a man who'd been to hell and back. We just need to hold it together long enough to deliver this intel and get the upper hand. Easier said than done, but when has that ever stopped us? Mira said, a small smile breaking through her usual stoic demeanor. Exactly. Now let's finish what we started, Jackson said, settling back into his chair with a renewed sense of purpose. As the Oblivion continued its journey through the stars, the crew braced themselves for the battles to come. They'd been betrayed, tested, and pushed to the brink, but they were still standing, even if it was a little wobbly. And if the universe had taught them anything, it was that sometimes, just standing was victory enough. The dark matter nebula felt like a bad hangover, unforgiving and full of regret. Jackson Vire sat in his captain's chair with a headache that pulsed in time with the ship's engines. The Oblivion was a creaky old beast, barely holding together with duct tape and wishful thinking. Trust was in even shorter supply. Nice day for a mutiny, isn't it? Jackson quipped, though the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The bridge crew was a collection of weary souls, their trust as fractured as a politician's promise. Sure, if you're into self-destructive hobbies, Mira Calloway replied, fingers dancing over her console. Her sarcasm was sharper than a razor's edge, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of genuine worry. Nothing like being betrayed by your chief engineer to spice up the week, Jackson said, rubbing a hand over his stubbly chin. Really makes you question your hiring practices. Next time, maybe skip the interview questions about loyalty and focus on whether they enjoy espionage, Mira suggested, her tone dry as a desert. Their banter was interrupted by Lyra Calum's voice, a little too chipper for the current mood. Captain, we've got an update on those Zelroth transmissions. Thought you'd want to hear it. Lay it on me, Lyra. I could use some good news to crush my spirit further, Jackson said, turning towards Lyra's console where she was bent over her screens like a witch brewing a potion. Well, it's not exactly cheerful, Lyra conceded, her fingers flying over the keys. But I've decrypted enough to know the Zelroth are planning to accelerate their takeover. They're manipulating Earth's dark matter supplies. As if Earth wasn't already in a deep enough hole, Mira muttered. Might as well hand them a shovel, so what's the plan? We just sit here and send them a thank you card for the impending doom? Jackson asked, his voice tinged with frustration. I don't know, Captain. We're running out of time and options, Lyra said, her enthusiasm waning. If the Zelroth succeed, humanity's going to be the universe's next endangered species. Excellent. Because living on the brink wasn't exciting enough, Jackson replied, steepling his fingers as he pondered their increasingly dire situation. We've still got that data. Maybe we can use it to turn the tide, Mira suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. You think we can bargain with it? Threaten to leak it? Jackson asked, more to himself than to the crew. I'd say it's worth a shot, but I'm generally an optimist, Mira deadpanned, earning a snort from Jackson. Well, we're not exactly brimming with alternatives, are we? Jackson said, standing up and pacing the bridge. Lyra, keep digging. Maybe there's something we've missed. On it, Captain, Lyra said, diving back into her work with a fervor born of desperation. Jackson turned to Mira, eyes narrowing. Prepare a message. We're going to contact the Zelroth directly, you sure that's wise? They don't exactly have a reputation for friendly negotiations, Mira pointed out, eyebrows raised. Wise? No. Necessary? Definitely. Sometimes you have to take the risk, even if it means dancing with the devil. Let's just hope this devil doesn't lead, Mira replied, setting to work. As the hours ticked by, the atmosphere aboard the Oblivion grew more tense, like a rubber band stretched to its limit. Jackson's mind churned with possibilities, none of them good. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. Paranoia gnawed at the edges of their resolve. Every crew member eyed each other with suspicion, the ghost of Riggs' betrayal lingering like a bad smell. Jackson knew he had to pull them together, remind them why they were fighting. All right, everyone, listen up. Jackson's voice carried authority, a captain rallying his troops. We've all had our share of bad news, but we're not finished yet. Not by a long shot. We've got a chance, slim as it is, to make a difference. To stop the Zelroth from turning Earth into their personal dark matter buffet. But we need to work together, even when some of us might have other ideas. Lyra asked pointedly, not looking up from her screen. Especially then, Jackson said, his tone brooking no argument. The Zelroth are betting on us falling apart. Let's prove them wrong. Mira, standing by his side, nodded. If we're going down, might as well go down swinging, right? Exactly, Jackson agreed. Now let's make that call. The crew worked diligently, the tension palpable, the air thick with the kind of quiet determination that comes only when you've got your back against the wall. Signals ready, Captain, Mira said, her voice steady despite the circumstance. Patch it through, Jackson instructed, steeling himself for the confrontation. The screen flickered, shifting from static to reveal a Zelroth commander. Its visage was terrifying in a magnificent way, with eyes that glowed like molten metal and skin that seemed to shimmer with an eerie luminescence. A voice that sounded like grinding rocks filled the bridge. Humans, it sneered, the word dripping disdain. What do you wish to discuss before your inevitable demise? Nice to see you too, Jackson replied, sarcasm coating his words like armor. We have something you want and we're willing to talk terms. What could you possibly offer that would interest us? Information. We've got intel that could disrupt your plans, details on your manipulations of dark matter. I'm willing to share for the right price. The Zelroth commander's eyes narrowed, calculating. And what is it you desire? Simple. Back off your plans for Earth, Jackson said, his tone serious. Or we spread this data far and wide. Make it so every planet in the sector knows exactly what you're up to. A bold proposal, but why should we negotiate with you? The commander's voice was filled with skepticism, because even the best-laid plans can crumble. And because we're the kind of stubborn bastards who won't make it easy for you, Jackson shot back. The screen blinked off abruptly, leaving the crew in tense silence. They'd made their play, and now all they could do was wait for the Zelroth response, hope hanging by a thread. Well, that was something, Lyra commented, breaking the quiet. Yeah, Real inspiring stuff, Mira added, sarcasm lacing her words. Now we see if they bite, Jackson said, his gaze fixed on the screen. Either way, we've got a fight on our hands. The Oblivion continued its journey through the nebula, the crew caught in a maelstrom of uncertainty and frayed nerves. Every beep from their consoles, every flicker of lights, was a potential harbinger of doom. A few hours later, the ship's comms crackled to life, the unexpected sound causing everyone to jump. "Captain, we've got an incoming transmission." "It's the Zelroth," Mira announced, her voice tight with anticipation. "Put it through," Jackson ordered, bracing himself for whatever came next. The screen lit up with the face of the Zelroth commander once more. Its expression was unreadable, but those molten eyes bored into Jackson with an intensity that could melt steel. "We have considered your offer," the Zelroth said slowly, each word deliberate, "and decided it does not suit our interests." "Well, there goes Plan A," Jackson muttered under his breath. "Your threats do not concern us. We will proceed as planned. Consider this your last chance to surrender." Jackson felt a surge of anger. "Surrender? Not in this lifetime. Then you will die with your secrets," the Zelroth declared, cutting the transmission. "Well, that went swimmingly," Mira said, her voice edged with gallows humor. "Yeah, like a lead balloon," Jackson replied, frustration bubbling to the surface. "What now, Captain?" Lyra asked, her eyes serious. "Now we prepare for the worst," Jackson said, his determination hard as steel. "They're coming for us, so let's make sure they remember who they're dealing with." The crew set to work, the mood grim but resolute. They had no illusions about their chances, but there was a fierce pride in knowing they were doing the right thing, even if it was the last thing they ever did. "Riggs would have loved this," Mira said quietly, a hint of sadness in her voice. "He would have had something pessimistic to say, that's for sure," Jackson replied, recalling the chief engineer's penchant for doom and gloom. "Here's hoping he's wrong for once," Lyra added, her fingers flying over her console as she prepared the ship's defenses. The Oblivion was a patchwork of old technology and desperate measures, but it was theirs, and they'd defend it with everything they had. As the Zelroth ships loomed on the edges of their sensors, the crew braced for the inevitable confrontation. It was their darkest hour, but Jackson knew they'd face it with defiance. They were outclassed, outmatched, but never out of fight. "All right, folks," Jackson said, addressing his crew one last time. "Let's show these bastards what humans are made of. Try not to die, eh?" The bridge erupted in a chorus of agreement, humor laced with grim determination. They were ready to fight, ready to face whatever came next, and ready to prove that humanity would never go quietly into the night. The bridge of the Oblivion was a mess of anxiety and grim determination, like a funeral where the corpse was still deciding whether to wake up and join the mourners. Lyra sat hunched over her console, eyes darting across screens like a cat chasing a laser pointer. Her fingers flew over the keys, tapping out a rhythm that was a symphony only to the desperate. Jackson leaned against the bulkhead, watching her with a mix of hope and resignation. "Lyra, if you've got something, now's the time to spill the beans. Unless it's bad news, in which case, give it to Riggs," he said, throwing a glance to the absent pessimist. Even a cynic needed a break from bad news sometimes. Lyra squinted at her screen as if trying to melt it with sheer concentration. "I've been digging through the Zelroth transmissions, and I think I've found something. It's a pattern in their comms, like a heartbeat, but, one with arrhythmia." Jackson's eyebrows shot up. "A vulnerability. Please tell me it's not. Try turning it off and on again." Lyra chuckled, a sound that was almost rusty from disuse. "No, but close. It's like they're using a specific relay point that's not as secure as the rest. If we hit it, we might just expose their operations to the whole galaxy." "Risky," Mira interjected, not looking up from her own console. Her sarcasm was as sharp as a blade. "But hey, desperate times call for, well, dumb decisions, really." "Any chance this relay is guarded by the Zelroth equivalent of a gerbil?" Jackson asked, his voice a mix of sarcasm and genuine curiosity. "If only," Lyra replied. but from what I can tell, it's more like a heavily armored gerbil with laser cannons. Excellent. Just what we need, Jackson said, the sarcasm flowing as naturally as the ship's recycled air. So we break into their comms, expose them, and hope they don't decide to have us for lunch. Hey, if we're on the menu, at least we know we're the main course, Mira said, her dark humor a welcome relief from the tension. Right. So, how do we hit this relay without becoming space debris? Jackson asked, pushing off from the bulkhead and walking over to Lyra's console. Lyra tapped a few keys, bringing up a schematic of the relay. We get in close and hack it, simple as that. Oh, sure, and I'll just go out and wrestle a black hole while I'm at it, Jackson muttered. Better you than me, Captain, Mira shot back. Jackson sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right, folks, let's prep for a little dance with the Zelroth. Mira, get the targeting systems ready. Lyra, keep cracking those codes. We need every advantage we can get. You got it, Captain, Mira said, her fingers already flying over her console. Let's make sure we're the last thing those buggers expect, Lyra added, her voice tinged with a mix of fear and determination. The crew of the Oblivion was a motley bunch, held together more by stubbornness than unity. But in that moment, their collective resolve was palpable, like a force field against despair. As they prepared for what could be their final stand, the air crackled with the kind of tension that only life-or-death situations could muster. Jackson glanced around the bridge, at the faces of his crew, each one etched with a determination born of necessity. Remember, we don't have to outrun the bear, he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. We just have to trip the other guy. Assuming the bear doesn't have rocket boosters, Mira quipped, her eyes still on her screen. Well, let's hope this bear prefers its meals less spicy, Jackson replied. As preparations continued, the Oblivion maneuvered through the dark matter nebula, its journey as precarious as a tightrope walker in a hurricane. Every second felt like an eternity, the quiet hum of the ship's systems punctuated by the occasional curse or wry remark from the crew. Captain, Lyra called out, breaking the silence. I've got something. The relay's security protocols are weaker than I thought. We might actually have a shot. Good news, on my ship, who allowed that, Jackson said, his grin crooked. Don't get used to it, Mira said, smirking. Universe has a way of correcting optimism, remember. Believe me, I don't have that problem, Jackson replied. The Oblivion continued its course, the relay point looming larger on their screens. With every passing moment, the stakes increased, the potential reward balanced by the very real threat of annihilation. All right, folks, Jackson said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of command. We're going in. Keep your eyes sharp and your wits sharper. Let's show these Zelroth bastards what happens when you mess with the Oblivion. The bridge was a hive of activity, each crew member focused, their minds as sharp as the edge of a blade. The humor that had buoyed them through so many dark times was still present, but now it served as a reminder of what they stood to lose. Approaching the relay point, Mira announced, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of tension. Ready to initiate hack, Lyra said, her fingers poised over her console like a pianist about to strike the first note of a symphony. Let's do this, Jackson commanded, his eyes fixed on the screen. The ship surged forward, the relay point growing larger, a silent sentinel against the vastness of space. As the Oblivion drew closer, the tension in the air was almost tangible, a living thing that wrapped itself around the crew, binding them together with a common purpose. And then, with a flick of Lyra's fingers, the hack was initiated. Here goes nothing, Lyra muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. The seconds stretched into eons, each one a lifetime of anticipation and dread. The relay point's defenses were formidable, but Lyra's skill and determination were a match for even the most sophisticated of systems. We're in, Lyra announced, her voice a mix of relief and triumph. Nice work, Jackson said, a laugh escaping his lips. Now let's broadcast their dirty laundry to every corner of the galaxy. Mira worked her console with practiced ease, her movements precise and deliberate. Transmission sent. If there's a planet within earshot, they're about to get one hell of a wake-up call. Zelroth's gonna have a PR disaster on their tentacles, Jackson said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied grin. Assuming we survive long enough to see it, Mira replied, her tone wry. No pressure, Jackson said, his smile fading as he focused on the task at hand. Now we just have to not get killed. Piece of cake, Lyra added, though her expression was anything but confident. The Oblivion sensors lit up, a cacophony of alarms and alerts that signaled the approach of Zelroth's ships. It was as if the universe had decided to crash their party with the worst kind of gate crashers. Incoming, Mira announced, her voice steady despite the approaching threat. Well, this is where it gets interesting, Jackson said, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. The Zelroth ships appeared on the view screen, sleek and menacing like sharks in the depths of an ocean. Their presence was a stark reminder of the danger they faced, a reminder that their actions had consequences. Ready to engage, Lyra said, her hands dancing over her console, prepping the ship's defenses. Jackson nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. All right, people, let's show them what happens when you pick a fight with the wrong humans. The bridge was a flurry of activity, each crew member working in concert to prepare for the imminent battle. The air was thick with tension, but beneath it all was a thread of hope, a belief that they could make a difference, even if it cost them everything. The Zelroth ships closed in, their weapons primed, their intentions clear. The Oblivion was outgunned, outmatched, but never out of options. Fire at will, Jackson ordered, his voice a command that brooked no disobedience. The Oblivion's weapons sprang to life, a symphony of destruction that lashed out at the Zelroth ships. The battle was fierce, each ship maneuvering with precision and skill, each crew member fighting for survival. As the battle raged, the crew worked tirelessly, their determination unwavering. They fought with a ferocity born of desperation, their actions fueled by the knowledge that their actions could change the course of history. Shields holding, Mira reported, her voice calm even as the ship shuddered under enemy fire. Keep it up, Jackson said, his focus unyielding. We're not done yet. The Zelroth ships pressed their attack, their weapons a relentless barrage that tested the limits of the Oblivion's defenses. But the crew held firm, their resolve unbreakable, their courage undiminished. And then, just as it seemed that all was lost, a message came through the comms, a voice crackling with urgency and hope. Captain Vire, this is Admiral Zephyr of the United Nations Fleet. We've received your transmission. Reinforcements are on the way. Jackson allowed himself a brief moment of relief, a smile breaking through his grim determination. Looks like we live to fight another day, he said, his voice tinged with both relief and disbelief. Let's just hope they bring enough firepower, Mira replied, her tone laced with wry humor. Knowing our luck. Probably not, Jackson said, laughter bubbling up despite the gravity of their situation. The battle continued, each second a testament to the crew's courage and resilience. They were survivors, fighters, and in that moment they were heroes. The Zelroth ships continued their assault, but with the knowledge that they were no longer alone, the crew of the Oblivion fought with renewed vigor. They were a force to be reckoned with, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, humanity would not be cowed. As the battle reached its crescendo, Jackson knew that their actions had set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. They had found a weakness in the Zelroth armor, a vulnerability that could be exploited, and they were determined to see it through to the end. Captain, reinforcements are arriving, Lyra announced, her voice filled with hope. The view screen lit up with the arrival of the United Nations fleet, their ships a welcome sight against the backdrop of the nebula. They were outmanned but not outmatched. Together, they would stand against the Zelroth, and they would fight for the survival of humanity. Let's finish this, Jackson said, his voice a rallying cry that resonated through the bridge. The crew responded with cheers and renewed determination, their spirits lifted by the knowledge that they were not alone. Together, they would face the challenge ahead, united in their resolve to protect their home, their people, and their future. As the battle raged on, the Oblivion and its crew became a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope in a galaxy teetering on the brink. They were fighters, survivors, and they would not go quietly into the night. They would fight and they would win. "Captain, got another one on the tail." Mira's voice came over the clamor of alarms and the dull thud of enemies trying to punch their way through their defenses. "Isn't that thoughtful of them?" Jackson replied, punching a few commands into his terminal. The screen flickered with data faster than a gambler's dice roll. "Guess they really believe in overkill. Like a bad date you can't shake," Mira shot back, her fingers flying over her console like an irritated pianist forced to play the same terrible tune. "Well, we aren't going to be the ones footing the bill," Jackson said, eyes glued to the tactical display. The Zelroth ships were closing in, their sleek, alien hulls shimmering with lethal intent. They were designed to look like they belonged in a nightmare, and right now they were making that nightmare a reality Jackson could do without. "Focus, people," Lyra interjected, her tone as sharp as ever. She was hunched over her console, eyes narrowed like a cat poised to pounce on a particularly annoying laser pointer. "Speaking of focus," Riggs chimed in, voice crackling over the comms from engineering. "It'd be nice to have any on our shielding, Cap. Another hit like that and we'll be taking the express route to the afterlife." "Riggs, if I wanted a forecast, I'd ask for the weather, not a funeral invitation," Jackson snapped, though his lips curled into a half-smile. "Just keeping it real, Captain," Riggs replied, the sound of something clattering in the background. "If you want optimism, you'll have to find another engineer." "Find me that engineer and I'll buy him a drink," Jackson said, shaking his head. Mira's voice cut through the banter. "Captain, Lyra's got a bead on the main relay defenses. They're tangled up like headphone wires in a pocket. We can slip past if we're good and if Lyra's magic fingers hold up." "Fingers crossed," Lyra muttered, her eyes locked on her screen. "More like toes and everything else," Jackson quipped. "But all right, Lyra, do your thing. And remember, if you screw up, it's the end of the world." "No pressure. Thanks for the pep talk," Lyra said dryly, her hands a blur as she navigated through layers of alien security like an experienced pickpocket at a rich folks' gala. The ship rocked again, nearly throwing Mira from her seat. "For the love of, these guys really don't take a hint." "Guess we'll have to be a bit more persuasive," Jackson grinned, though it was strained. "Remember the plan, folks. Transmit the dirt on these tentacled bastards and get it to Earth before they turn us into space debris." "As if I could forget," Mira said, her voice tinged with irony. "No pressure, right?" "None at all," Jackson replied, his voice mockingly chipper. Just then, Lyra let out a victorious whoop. "We're in. Starting the data transmission now." "Good work, Lyra," Jackson said, a genuine note of admiration in his voice. "Now, let's give these overgrown calamari a taste of their own medicine." The ship hummed with life as the relay point accepted their transmission, sending information streaking across the stars. It was a shot in the dark, a desperate gamble. But then again, desperate gambles were the crew's bread and butter. Mira's console beeped, indicating the data was being sent successfully. "It's going through. If there's anyone on Earth not living under a rock, they're about to get an earful." "Hope they're ready for the truth," Jackson said. "Not that they're likely to appreciate it much." "Yeah, truth's got a way of being bad for business," Mira observed. "Especially when it comes with tentacles." Jackson snorted, but the humor was short-lived. The Zelroth ships were still closing in, determined to make a very permanent example of the Oblivion and its crew. "Captain," Riggs chimed in, voice tense. "Our engines are running hotter than a politician in a scandal. We need to make a move before we're stuck here, counting the seconds to oblivion." "Working on it," Jackson replied. "Mira, how's the situation looking?" "Like a bad haircut, not getting better with time," she answered without looking up. "But the data's almost fully uploaded. Just need a little more time." "I'd love to offer some," Jackson said, "but we might be fresh out." The enemy ships were closing in and the Oblivion was running out of tricks, or at least any that didn't involve certain doom. Jackson drummed his fingers against the armrest, his mind whirring with possibilities. Then an idea. "Riggs, how's our power distribution looking?" "Ugly and about to get uglier," Riggs replied. "Why?" "Think we can overload the relay once the data's through. Give them a nice little surprise." There was a pause, then Riggs' voice came back, laced with reluctant admiration. "It's a long shot, but yeah, I can rig something. It'll be like ringing the doorbell and leaving a flaming bag of—" "Let's keep it PG, Riggs," Jackson interrupted, though he couldn't help but chuckle. "Mira, keep those ships off our backs until we're ready. Lyra, let me know the second that data's done." "On it, Captain," Mira replied, her console lighting up as she put the ship through a dizzying series of evasive maneuvers. "Data's almost there." "And done," Lyra announced, a note of triumph in her voice. "Riggs, do your worst," Jackson commanded. "With pleasure," Riggs said. There was a brief pause, and then the ship shuddered as power surged through its systems, a violent ripple that cascaded towards the relay. "Goodbye, you ugly piece of alien overengineering," Jackson muttered under his breath as the relay exploded in a dazzling display of light and energy. The Zelroth ships, caught off guard, wavered in their pursuit. It was the opening the Oblivion needed. "Now, Mira," Jackson barked. "Already on it," she replied, deftly steering the ship away from the wreckage and weaving through the chaos left in their wake. The Zelroth ships faltered, hesitating as their relay disintegrated, taking with it their tactical advantage. Jackson watched the view screen, a wicked grin spreading across his face as the enemy reeled. "Looks like they just lost their RSVP to the invasion party," Lyra quipped, her voice tinged with satisfaction. "Let's hope they take the hint," Jackson said, though he doubted it. The Zelroth weren't known for backing down easily. But for now, they had other things to worry about, like not getting blown to smithereens. "Captain, more ships incoming," Mira reported, her voice carrying a sense of urgency. "They're not giving up without a fight." "Figures," Jackson replied. "They never do, but let's make them work for it." The Oblivion danced through space, each turn a narrow escape, each maneuver a calculated risk. The crew worked in sync, a well-oiled machine honed by years of facing impossible odds. "Riggs, can you give us any more speed?" Jackson asked, his eyes scanning the displays. "Only if you want to risk leaving engine parts strewn across the nebula," Riggs replied, the sound of strain evident in his voice. "We're running on fumes as it is." "Then we'll have to do it the hard way," Jackson said. "Hold on, everyone." The ship jerked as it dodged another salvo, the Zelroth ships determined to make them pay for their audacity. But Jackson was determined to go down fighting, even if it meant taking a piece of the enemy with them. "Incoming call from Admiral Zephyr," Lyra announced, the communication line crackling to life. "Captain Vire, hang in there," came Zephyr's voice, calm but commanding. "We're moving in to flank them. Stand by for support." "About time you showed up to the party, Admiral," Jackson replied, his tone half joking, half relieved. "We were starting to think you'd forgotten the address." "Never doubted you for a second, Captain," Zephyr replied, the smile evident in his words. "Let's finish this." With the arrival of the UN fleet, the tide began to turn. The Zelroth ships found themselves outmaneuvered, their numerical advantage evaporating as Allied forces bore down on them. Jackson watched the view screen, satisfaction mixing with exhaustion. They had fought hard, and despite the odds, they had come out on top. The Zelroth ships were retreating, their once imposing presence now a shadow of its former self. "Looks like they're heading for the exit," Mira observed, her tone both relieved and incredulous. "Guess they finally took the hint." "Good riddance," Jackson said, leaning back in his chair, the weight of command lifting ever so slightly. "Let's hope they think twice before trying to pull another stunt like this." The bridge erupted in cheers, the tension finally giving way to relief and celebration. They had fought together, survived together, and in doing so had struck a blow against a seemingly invincible foe. As the Oblivion limped away from the battlefield, Jackson allowed himself a moment to reflect. They had risked everything, and though the cost had been high, they had succeeded. "Captain, message from Earth," Lyra said, her voice cutting through the din. "They're sending their thanks for the enlightening data you sent." "Looks like the Zelroth won't have it so easy from now on." Jackson nodded, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. "Guess we've done our bit for humanity today. And lived to tell the tale," Mira added, her trademark sarcasm tinged with genuine gratitude. "Here's hoping for a few quiet days," Jackson said, though he knew better than to count on it. In their line of work, peace was a fleeting thing, and trouble was always just around the corner. But for now, they'd take what victories they could get, and savor the knowledge that today, at least, they'd managed to tip the scales in humanity's favor. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, but they would face them together, as they always had. Because in the end, that's what it meant to be part of the Oblivion's crew, to fight, to survive, and to never, ever back down. Jackson glanced around at his crew, at the faces worn with exhaustion but lit with a fire that refused to be quenched. "All right, folks, take 5, he said, a rare moment of softness in his voice. "We've earned it." As the crew settled in for a brief respite, Jackson leaned back, a sense of satisfaction settling over him. They'd faced the darkness and emerged victorious, and though the road ahead would be fraught with danger, they would face it together. Because that's what family does. The aftermath of the Zelroth skirmish was a bit like waking up after a rowdy party. Everyone was still alive, but everything was a mess, and nobody knew where their dignity had wandered off to. The Oblivion drifted through space, trailing loose bolts and the lingering scent of burnt circuits. Jackson Vire, the captain who somehow managed to keep this floating debris field operational, sat at his terminal, a mix of relief and caffeine kicking through his system. The view screen displayed a lone message from Earth. "Thanks for the heads up on the Tentacle Brigade. We'll take it from here." "Uplifting as usual," Jackson muttered, scratching his chin. "They think they can wrap this up with a thank you card." Mira Calloway, sitting next to him, rolled her eyes. "Sounds about right, as if we did all this just to be a footnote in some politician's re-election campaign." "Maybe they'll name a star after us," Jackson suggested sarcastically. The "Please Drop Dead" Nebula, Riggs, ever the ray of sunshine, chimed in through the intercom from the engine room. "Assuming we survive the return trip, they might give us a discount on scrap metal." "Oh good," Mira replied. "Just what I've always wanted, cheap repairs on a ship that's one light sneeze away from falling apart." The intercom crackled again, this time with Lyra's voice. "Hey, don't knock it. I hear Rust is making a comeback in Spaceship Chic." Jackson laughed, the sound surprisingly light in the gloom of the command deck. "We'll be trendsetters yet then." The Zelroth had retreated, their relay reduced to a cloud of space rubble, and Earth's governments, in a rare moment of less than utter incompetence, were uniting to protect their dark matter resources. It was the sort of coordination that only occurred when faced with an existential threat, like someone finally using your precious coffee mug without asking. Reports rolled in from across the solar system, detailing the hasty formation of alliances and tactical measures, a patchwork quilt of human stubbornness sewn together with a thread of desperation. Jackson couldn't help but feel a grim sort of satisfaction. "Looks like humanity's finally got its act together," Jackson said, leaning back in his seat. "Who knew all it took was a bunch of squid-faced invaders?" Riggs's voice cut through the speakers again. "I'm sure it won't last. Give it a month and they'll be back to squabbling over asteroid mining rights." "Ever the optimist, Riggs," Mira shot back, unable to suppress a grin. "But you've got a point. We're not exactly known for playing nice." Lyra appeared in the doorway, her face betraying a mix of exhaustion and defiance. "I found something interesting in the Zelroth data. A transmission pattern. Looks like they were coordinating not just with their own ships but with someone on the inside." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Great. Just when you thought the guest list couldn't get any worse." "Spies," Mira snorted. "I wonder if they got vacation days." "We'll deal with them when the time comes," Jackson said, a dark edge to his voice. "But for now, let's enjoy this little breather." In the following days, the Oblivion's crew enjoyed an unusual luxury, relative peace. Repairs were underway, albeit on a budget that could stretch the definition of functioning to its limits. The universe, in a rare act of charity, allowed them this respite. Earth was alive with the buzz of a united front, governments forming a labyrinthine tapestry of alliances. The Zelroth had done them the favor of becoming the universal villain, and the crew of the Oblivion found themselves hailed as heroes, albeit reluctant ones. "Never thought I'd see the day where I'd be a hero," Riggs grumbled as he tinkered with a mass of wires that might once have been a control panel. "Thought I'd die as that guy who couldn't keep the engine running. In this line of work, heroism's just one bad decision away," Jackson said, watching him work. "But don't worry, Riggs, you can still aim for the latter." Lyra, perched nearby with a datapad, smirked. "Maybe we should write a self-help book, how to survive deep space and get the worst job perks imaginable." Chapter 1, Don't, Mira added dryly. Chapter 2, If you didn't listen to Chapter 1, you're already screwed. Jackson chuckled, shaking his head. "At least we've got stories to tell, assuming anyone lives long enough to care." The crew settled into an uneasy routine, performing repairs, keeping an eye on communications. They were vigilant, knowing full well that the Zelroth might return, or worse, that their mysterious human allies might decide to send a personal thank you in the form of a knife in the back. Earth's newfound unity was a fragile thing, like a ceasefire between neighboring cats. But it was something, a step towards a future that wasn't bound by the whims of alien invaders. That was enough to keep the crew moving forward. In the quiet of the Oblivion's bridge, Jackson found himself reflecting on the past few weeks. They'd survived, beaten back an enemy that had every advantage, and lived to joke about it. Not bad for a crew that barely qualified for paid vacation time. "Captain," Lyra said, drawing him back to the present, "we've got a message from Admiral Zephyr. Looks like the fleet's holding and they're working on a plan to secure the dark matter fields permanently." Jackson nodded. "Good. They need to play offense while the Zelroth are licking their wounds. And apparently," Lyra continued, "they want to debrief us in person. Zephyr says it's a formality, but considering we're the ones who kicked the hornet's nest, they probably want to make sure we don't do it again." "Nothing says thank you like an interrogation," Mira quipped. "Well, let's not keep them waiting," Jackson said. "Set course for the nearest station. Might as well see how the other half lives." As the Oblivion's engine sputtered to life, the crew prepared for their journey back to civilization, or what passed for it in the cosmos. They were battered, bruised, but far from beaten. There was a resilience in them that refused to be snuffed out, a determination to face whatever came next head-on. As they traveled, notifications from Earth continued to stream in, each more optimistic than the last. The Zelroth were scattered, their plans unraveled, and humanity in its stubborn, brilliant way was rising to meet the challenge. Jackson leaned back in his chair, the tension easing from his shoulders. For all their faults, humans were a tenacious lot. They'd fight tooth and nail for survival, even if it meant uniting against a common foe. "Captain," Mira said, breaking the silence, "think we'll ever catch a break?" "Not likely," Jackson replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "But that's what makes life interesting, isn't it?" "Interesting's one word for it," Lyra said, her expression thoughtful. "But hey, if it were easy, they'd have sent someone else." The Oblivion continued its course, a testament to human resilience, a ship held together by duct tape and sheer stubbornness, much like its crew. They were heroes, wanted or not, and they had made a difference, however small. As the stars streaked by outside the viewscreen, Jackson allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The universe was vast, indifferent, and often hostile, but here they were, still standing, still fighting, because that's what humans did. They persevered, adapted, and survived against all odds, and in the end, that was what mattered. "All right, crew," Jackson said, his voice carrying a note of finality. "Let's go show Earth what real heroes look like." The crew cheered, their spirits buoyed by a fierce sense of camaraderie. They had faced the darkness together and emerged on the other side, stronger than before. As the Oblivion sailed towards its next destination, the crew knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more battles to fight, more challenges to overcome, but they would face them together as a family. And for Jackson, that was enough.